Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another THRIVEcast. My name is DJ Eshelman. I am your host today, along with my friend Jeff Pitch. If I can find the right button. Goodness gracious me. There we go. That button right there.
No.
Welcome, Jeff. If I can get your signal
I
in.
was gonna say,
Wow. Yeah, it wouldn't be a morning like this without some sort of technical issue, right? So,
hey,
yeah, you're saying audio only. That's not good. Let's try this again. Let's try this.
hey!
Hey.
Is this video now, not audio? Is that
Yeah, we're just gonna yeah.
keep flipping back and forth?
We're just gonna flip back and forth. We'll get it figured out. I have my coffee. I'll get started with that.
Well, I drink my
Yeah.
Red Bull.
Red Bull this morning. All right.
We all have our things, whatever. But good morning, everybody. Good Thursday, or good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming in from.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Tech Guy says hello again, Tech Guy. Johnny Ma says hi. What's good? You're good, man.
Are you okay, DJ? Is this? You sound frazzled.
It's weird. Like I click on a button and it goes, huh? What? Huh?
Wonderful.
It's one of those mornings.
Yes.
Awesome, guys. Well, welcome to Thrive IT and the THRIVEcast. Today we have Mr. Benjamin Crill joining us in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, Benjamin Crill.
Greetings.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing better and getting better every day, as my coach tells me.
There you go.
I think that's a good one.
You got better in the last couple of minutes. You got him on first try. Video and audio.
One button away. That's what that was. Well, welcome, guys. Today we're going to be talking about Benjamin's career and how that's gone for him, and some observations along the way. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that for Benjamin or us, just let us know in the comments. One thing I do want to say before we get started here is that there is a little bit of a delay. I haven't timed it this morning. I think it's about between 20 and 30 seconds. So if you do say hi, just remember that there is a little bit of a delay there. So give us some context, just in case we've moved on from the conversation. We need to catch back up again.
Now, one thing I do want to say, especially with Benjamin's career, is, we usually talk about going from administrator to, could be consulting, could be sales engineering. Benjamin has recently made the flip and gone back into administration. So I think it's fascinating. It's a different side of things that we usually, for whatever reason, don't talk about. Yeah. So that's a great thing to have on. So thank you, Benjamin.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I tell you what, let's get started with maybe some background about yourself and how you got, maybe just pre-IT and then how you got started in IT.
Yeah, so I got started in IT back before kind of computers really blew up, early 2000. My brother came home from college and he had a desktop computer sitting there in what was my room at the time. And I kind of looked at that and said, that looks interesting, cracked it open and said, that really doesn't look too complicated. I could probably do something like that. And so then that summer, I just started the process of building my own computer. And from there, just the intrigue kept growing, and switched my major and went over to computer science and haven't looked back since. So graduated in 2003, got my first job in Indianapolis working for an agricultural company, which was interesting. That's really where I got my start with Citrix technology specifically, because we literally had guys out in a cornfield who needed access to their corporate data. So worked for them, and then for about 3.5, 4 years. And then at that point in time, I made the usual switch that Jeff referenced, in where I went from the administration side over to the consulting side, and I spent I think it was about 15 years in the consulting side, and then at the end of last year, switched back to the administration side. So I work for a little grocer that you might hear of as Kroger. So when you talk about the administration side, it's a pretty big administration job. So it's kind of not the, it's one of those where it's like they may not what you normally see, but it's pretty significant jump.
Yeah, and sometimes I think there's a distinction that we fail to make between administrators and engineers, and the kind of the distinction there, where administrators are traditionally the ones that are just care and feeding, and engineers are the ones that are actually taking care of the environment as far as like building new things and escalation points and things like that. So I don't know where you're sitting on that side of things.
Sure. I mean, there's, there is certainly a component of my job that is, day-to-day care and feeding of the system and responding to support requests. But I'm not frontline by any means. So we've got a number of tiers it goes through. And we kind of break the team up to some more operational folks. And my focus is more on, getting things set up for the next thing, for the next major initiative within the corporation, or, planning for the next technology that's going to come out that we're going to need to leverage to help what we're already doing.
Did you just say you can tell the future and prepare for the next?
After the last 3 months, no. I can't predict what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes.
I think the best part to come out of this is that there are literally plague squirrels in Colorado. Really?
I have no comment about that.
So, yeah. So, it's funny. I think I mentioned this to you when you first told me, Benjamin, about you going to Kroger. Is early career, I was Spartan Stores here in Michigan. Grocer. They merged relatively recently with Nash. I can't remember that, but it's Spartan Nash, and they're kind of in the Great Lakes region, but not nearly as large as Kroger. And I think I told the story about my biggest screw up while I was there, in literally having to I screwed up the servers in each store. I mean, this was late 90s, early 2000s. And I went from like east to west in Michigan overnight, hitting like 10 stores.
Nice.
Yeah. We didn't have all the tools that we did today.
Yep.
It's true. And well, even in that regards, a lot of the job roles keep changing too. There's a lot of things that, like when you have some of the organizations were set up very early on, sometimes their job titles don't evolve very rapidly or at all. And so like a systems engineer, for example, might be a role that encompasses a lot of different things, or administrator might encompass a lot of things. And so James says, don't forget to add in the architect roles internally too. And I think that's important. Yeah. So the architect title has been a hard battle for a lot of companies to adopt, especially those that are traded publicly, because they have to arrange any kind of job titles, have to have like a designation of pay scale and things like that. And so a lot of companies have actually been resistant to add in any kind of named role like that, even when they actually have those functions and have those things. They'll call it like a senior engineer or something like that when they're actually an architect. It's kind of one of those things that's sort of like certification where, what does it really mean? It means what you think it means, at the moment,
Correct.
I think that is a big thing. I mean, industry wide, there is no set definition of a job title. What's the difference between a solution architect, a sales engineer, and systems engineer? I mean, as a job hunter, I'll find, this looks great, and then you look at the job description, and it's like, what? Yep. Solution architect, developer? what? So it's yeah, and internally into IT, and I think with companies with like Kroger is you run into the issue of there is typically, while there is a job description, you are typically going well outside of that job description just because everybody, you got to help your coworkers. They're going to help you. And, you can't sit there and say, well, my job says this and I can't go do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I would say that the job title thing is one of those, particularly, when I started off and you're trying to like make your mark in the world and blaze your trail, you think, oh, the job title, like I want the title. And certainly before IT really came along and you had jobs that were much better defined and technology didn't evolve as quickly, like the job title typically actually meant something. Whereas, over the last, I would say 5 years, I've come to the conclusion that job titles in technology are like version numbers for software. They mean absolutely nothing other than somebody in an office somewhere decided this is what it's going to be. But yeah, it's like, look at what you're going to be doing. Is that something that feeds your spirit and what you want to be doing? Is it something that has growth potential? But whatever that title is, who cares? You can call me, staff member number 45. If that makes it, whatever it is, then that's great. It doesn't really matter if they call you a particular position.
Yeah. It's an HR matter is what it comes down to. Like DJ said, pay scale, benefits, all that stuff. That's all it is.
Yeah, James says as long as we get paid, and to a degree, I would agree with that. However, I will say one thing about this that it was a struggle that I ran across pretty recently when I was trying to define all these things and kind of making kind of that work of okay, what do these things look like? And so when I started writing the book that I just finished, well, here, let's put that up on the screen there. That one right there. So when I did the oh my gosh, what chapter was that? There's a chapter. And I'm trying to define these various job roles that we tend to see in the IT industry, and it's really tough to do. It's really tough to define, okay, what's going to be what role, but there's some things that I can see as trends. The main thing with that is that if you have something where it's just general job titles for that company or whatever, the problem becomes portability. Like we know that most people don't stay in a job for very long these days. We don't have that kind of career pension kind of mentality anymore. And so when you have a job title that doesn't fit what you're doing or something that doesn't really build anything up for you, that can be a real challenge sometimes.
Yeah,
I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying, I mean, I've seen that where, you'll see somebody that, they get, I've seen it in banking industries because that seems to, they throw the VP title out there like it's candy. And then you try and go get another position and they're like, well, why do you want to be just a manager? You were a VP before. And you have to have that conversation like, yeah, I was a bank. So, everybody except for, the person that started it yesterday is a VP. It's, but it's particularly like when you're just trying to even get the conversation going, you may not necessarily know the hiring manager and you're just throwing your resume out there. They're looking at that and they're making a snap decision and they see VP and they're like overqualified.
Yep. And that's actually something that I almost fell into as well. Although there's a flip side of that too. Sometimes, like I got recruited for a position where like, okay, we want you to come in as our CTO. I'm like, okay, sounds great. I've never done CTO before. Let's do that. And get there. And it's like, it's actually director of technology. And I'm like, it's like, oh, this doesn't do anything for me.
And I think I think there is, I think with titles, there is a line that if you're working for non-vendor, like Kroger or whoever, titles are whatever. Mm-hmm. But when you get into the other side of it, like, you're working for a software vendor, hardware vendor, you could be a consultant. The titles do start to mean something, because you do, at least what I've seen, is there is a much more clear delineation between the engineer and the architect, or the sales engineer, versus, the guy going on site and that type of thing. Yes, they do, they will cross over, a lot of time, because they are colleagues. But it's typically not, at least again, from what I've seen, not as fluid as if you were doing an internal, working in an IT department.
Sure.
Yeah. So Adam says Network Ninja, in air fingers quotes, was fun in the early aughts. Not great when trying to find a job afterwards. Actually, yeah, I'm with you on that. There was some clever job titles I came up with at one point, like manager of advanced technologies or something like that. And it was one of those things where in order to get insurance, they had to have manager in the title. And so sometimes but yeah, it's like, sometimes it's fun. I mean, there's a lot of startups and whatnot that really had that mentality of let's kind of buck the trend and be disruptive and make our people feel culturally like they were part of that. Feels great until you realize, oh, that's not anything you can do outside of that company. They're like, we didn't want a ninja. We wanted a top tier engineer.
No, they wanted a samurai, not a ninja. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
You know the truth.
Racism is real. So Benjamin, I'm curious about something.
Yeah.
So you set a few transition points in your career. Looking back, what do you think was the thing in each of those transitions? What caused you to want to make those transitions?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that outright.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
I would say probably to boil it all down, and particularly the recent events have shown that even more on a little bit more of a micro level than a macro level. But it's one of those where there comes a point in time where you feel like you've accomplished everything you can here, and you're ready to blaze a new trail. It's one of those like, all right, I walked the Appalachian Trail. What's the next one I can do?
Right.
And it's not that there's anything that was bad or disappointing or there was not necessarily a compelling event, other than it's like, that looks new. That could challenge me in a way that I haven't been challenged yet, and I want to give it a try. Can I do it? It's the challenge of the next thing, and that's also one of the reasons why I like technology, is because there's always going to be a next thing. So I would say, if anything, that's the hard part, is trying to find, like, when you want to challenge yourself to the next thing from a career perspective, and then also coupling that with you're challenging yourself with new technologies within that new challenge. That's where it can become difficult and particularly stressful, trying to understand that it's not like it's not like when, say, if you're a lawyer, and I have no legal background, I'll tell you that, but it's like, I go to a new law firm. It's like, okay, I'm still doing law. I'm still probably specializing in the same type of law that I did, but now it's within a new organization. Maybe there's something that they're doing different organizationally, but fundamentally I'm still doing law. Whereas, now within technology, even within the end user computing space, it's completely and vastly different than what it was 5 years ago. So right. I make a transition from the reseller side of technology, and now I'm on the customer side. I'm working on evolving and trying new things out from a technology perspective, as well as from a different perspective of how those technologies get leveraged and what my perspective and relationship to the technologies are.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and it's great to get challenged in different ways. Sometimes we think of like new challenges, that there's that saying "new level, new devil" kind of a thing, but it doesn't always work like that. It's not always like you have to have a mountain of new tasks that you're taking on. Sometimes it really is Hey, you know what? I think I'll be happier in this. And it's kind of one of those weird things where I have some inside information here, so this is kind of not fair. But tell us a little bit about like other factors as well, like not just from the technology side, but from the life side of things. Like, have there been things where you said, okay, if I keep doing this way, I'm not going to be able to do things in my personal life the same way, that sort of thing?
Sure. Yeah, and that absolutely plays into it, particularly in technology. Work-life balance is a constant struggle. Anybody, in my opinion, anybody in the technology field that says work-life balance isn't the struggle is probably not being honest with you or themselves. There are some career decisions that I made, particularly earlier in my life that, if I look back on it now, it's like, that may not have, at the time, been the best decision to make. Now, thankfully, I was able to parlay that and kind of adjust from there. But, one time I had kind of a mentor that, we were working together at one particular company. He left, and I decided to follow him. And I thought that, one, working with somebody I was familiar with was, and continuing to do that would be certainly a good way to continue to develop myself. And I thought that this new company was doing things different, better way, and I would enjoy that. Ultimately, I didn't. There was a culture there that once you got in, it wasn't the most healthy. And certainly, this happens in a lot of consulting organizations, where it's all about the billable. And there is validity to that statement. But there's also the flip side of that as well, that I think really is becoming much more apparent now, is that you got to take care of your assets. You got to take care of, making sure that the people who are doing the billable are, good to go mentally, physically. If they're pounding the pavement, 12 hours a day, they may only be getting, 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. That's only sustainable for a certain period of time. And so it didn't take me long to realize that organization wasn't the best fit for me. Like, the technology was great, and what I was able to do within the technology, but the culture wasn't sustainable. And so I had to move on, and I moved on to another consulting organization at that period of time that had a better balance of making sure that you were taken care of personally and professionally, so that you weren't getting burnt out so quickly.
Yeah, it's important to. This is something there, guys. I am this close to just writing a whole nother book on this, but just the type of mindset we have in IT sometimes, where we have all of this success behind us, right? We have all these things we've done. Yet sometimes we get into that weird scarcity mindset. It's like, oh no, I can't ask for anything better. I can't set like boundaries for my career. I can't make it so that the things I want are paramount. I can only get what's handed to me. Like, where does this come from? So yeah, I applaud that.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing too that I've seen, and I've fallen into the trap myself, is that you want to make a name for yourself, and you want to be the guy that everybody goes, I can go to that guy. So I know that any problem, I go to him. He may not have the answer, but he'll have a way to get me to the answer. And it's kind of a nice pat on the back when somebody tells you you're that type of guy. And there's nothing wrong with being smart, being successful, but you also have to balance that with, one, is it healthy for you if everybody's always coming to you? Is that good for your organization if you're that choke point? Like, can you ever go on vacation? Or if you go on vacation, what's going to happen to your organization? Like, you need to spread the love and develop others, so that you're not the only one that is able to execute on some specific task or has the knowledge on a specific area of the business. Because while it feels good, it rapidly becomes this monster that is hard to get out from underneath, or you feel like you even can't get out from underneath it.
Yeah, and then you start feeling guilty taking time off, and I'll be off, but you can reach me anytime or something, and then it's not time off. Yeah,
correct.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. So, I mean, as far as that goes, I kind of want to talk a little bit about soft skills and some of the things like outside of just the technology, because we're kind of heading towards that as being kind of a distinction in my mind of when people are going to be able to. I don't like the word demands when it kind of comes to these things. It's kind of like define non-negotiables. If you don't have a mindset that comes around this full circle, then it's really hard to get into a mindset where it's like, okay, I can. It's not just that I can ask for these things. It's that I will only accept these things. Non-negotiables like I only will do things that don't interfere with my marriage or things like that. Years as a consultant, I found this to be true. It was like we had a threshold point, and eventually that threshold point was crossed. And I threw my hands up and said, okay, we're taking some time away from consulting work, because that was just like a non-negotiable, and things like that. But what you said about kind of being the person that's always doing everything that's like bombarded with all the requests, usually that's just because of some of those soft skills haven't been developed, but the technical ones have. And so everybody's coming to you for the technical stuff. James says, train for your replacement, but treat so they don't want to leave, which I think is exactly right. Yeah. So that's actually a perfect transition to what I was going to talk about. Benjamin, you wrote me a little while ago, and you mind if I read the?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. It says, and this is to give some background here. Benjamin is part of my launch team with the new book, and so he's been reading this ahead of everyone else. He's been kind of on that team of doing this. So he says, just finished book 2 and I love it. Honestly, there were points in there that I could have used even as a seasoned consultant and plan to use as I document things with Kroger. This section should be a must-have for any pro services firm as an onboarding for consultants. And here's the one that I really want to get some clarification on. So I struggled for many years with the communication aspect, and I failed so many times until you get a feel for it. You laid out in writing what I went through as a gauntlet to figure out. And he says, even though I never wrote it down, so you win. What was the gauntlet?
So the thing that I learned quickly in consulting is that it's important what you say, and sometimes it's more important what you don't say, or when you hold off on saying something. I had a sales guy that I worked with. He always used to joke that, from the technical side, we would come in and, like, if we're doing an assessment, he's like, you're basically coming in to tell somebody that their baby's ugly. And I'd be like, yeah, there's that point of it. That's not necessarily the driving force, but really what you're trying to do, or what you might be in the situation, hopefully you come in and you look at something, everything's good. You write up the document, you're doing great. You don't really need me anymore. But there's some times where you come in and you're like, whoa, this is messed up. But the flip side of that is this is their body of work. They have a personal attachment to it. So you have to sometimes be in the unenviable situation of, you have to tell somebody that their baby's ugly and get them to agree that you can help make their baby not ugly. And that's where you have to phrase what you're saying very carefully. Phrase the recommendations in a way that you're saying, the other piece of it is, you don't necessarily know, what you're looking at that point in time. You have no history as to what it took to get it to that, or what brought it to that point. Probably more accurately is that, a lot of times in technology, nobody sets out with this plan of, I'm going to set it up this way. And you look at it 5 years down the road and you're like, why did you do that? I didn't do that because I wanted to do it. I did it because I had to do it for whatever reason. I didn't have the skills at the time that I set it up. And so I just set it up the way that I knew how, or, particularly, I will not be surprised if come 2021, there is a lot of consulting work for organizations for reassessments of COVID response. And because it's like, you did so much because you were told, hey, in 2 days, everybody's leaving the office, get it set up. Okay. Yeah. It doesn't leave a whole lot of margin for error. You get something set up and you do it so that it works. It doesn't really much matter if it's to the reference architecture from the vendor, because come Friday, when they're at home, you want them working. You don't want to be on a P2 call because they can't get to their email, to their data or whatever. So, there's a lot of that you have to essentially, and you have to phrase that. It's like, if I were to come in a year later and look at somebody's, somebody's architecture, I might look at it and say, okay, here's where we can improve upon things, understand, not really talk about the good or bad, why it got here. Because, when it all's said and done, this is where we're at. This is our reality. So how do we take it from here? Sometimes too, people focus too much on the past, and you're like, it doesn't really, that part to a certain extent doesn't matter, but how do we get them here and say, here's what we can do to help you. Here's how you can help your organization. By doing this, you're going to improve your service. You're going to improve your productivity. And don't say it was done wrong. Here's how you should do it. Because, you may come out and say, here's how you should do it. And then you present that and the management goes, oh, we have this compliance thing, and it completely shoots it down. So you just, if you don't have the context of the full context, and most of the times you have to assume you don't have the full context, particularly when you're talking about large organizations, you just need to be really careful about what you say, when you say it, who you say it to. And there may be certain times where you have to be like, you just can't say that right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And actually, this is actually the hot button that, well, my friend Nick will say this like bang the gong over and over again. They're not best practices because you don't know what's best. They're leading practices because this is what we're going with as our best foot forward kind of thing, but doesn't necessarily mean this is actually absolutely best in all circumstances, because it doesn't work that way. IT is complex. IT is very complex. You throw end user computing on there, which is, primarily what we're talking about here, but it can be applied to a lot of situations. I mean, all you have to do is throw in two-factor authentication into something to just mess up with just a lot of things. It's easy to do. And so just the notion that, there's only one way to do it is just not compatible these days. Yeah. But something that Jeff and I talked about early on, I think is kind of and I kind of want to swing back around to, is the notion of, even though, yes, we might be engineers, consultants, architects, administrators, even service desk people, we have to approach things from a sales point of view, and not that, it's not like trying to sell them something that they're going to buy, but that mentality is something where you have to be basically selling them on why they're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
and I think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, I think a lot of those processes, those systems that, we would come in as a consultant and say like, wow, this is not right. Or, you're thinking, oh, this is bad. A lot of the time it comes down to, like you said, with the COVID response, is pressure. Time pressure. You don't have time. Or, I think back to, the early days of Active Directory. How you set Active Directory up in those early days is completely different. And it's because we just didn't know any better. Nobody knew any better. Mm-hmm. So it's, the process has changed. The way you start out is not the way, is a lot of times not where it's going to end up. with the changing of knowledge and technology itself, the end result may be very different, but you made decisions back when that still affect what's happening today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's times where like you don't know where the technology is going to evolve from. I mean, if you were to go back into 2002 and said, oh, by the way, there's going to come a time where you're going to sync your authentication system out to the cloud, people would look at you and just be like, you're absolutely flipping nuts. But now it's a given almost. So yeah, and you got to what DJ said, to sell to a certain extent. Yeah, you're always in a sales mentality, is that you're trying to, and to a certain extent, I would say more persuade, is how do you get them to understand like the vision that you're seeing of where this could go, and they can help shape that vision as well, but persuade them like there can be more to this. There can be a better way, or a more robust way, and if you just say you should have been doing it this way, then that just ends the conversation. But if you say, think about if there was something like this, and you just start to paint a picture, and then their mind starts get going and like, oh, now I can see something, and all right, this is going to be a problem, but if we can do this, and then you just start down that path, but you get them to come along, and you get them to start pulling you along with it as well. It's like you're there to be the spark and let them take it from there.
So Adam says, my email signature contained best practices are just workarounds for known issues for a while. I was like, yeah, that's actually sometimes when you're dealing with other tech people, you have to remind them that, that hill they're wanting to die on maybe isn't the best hill in the world to die on.
That hill may not be there in a year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that goes back to sort of our mentality as tech people. I mean, we work with computers, ones and zeros, on and off. We do tend to think black and white. It's, oh man, I've done it this way. It worked for me here, and this is the way it is. And it's hard to get out of that mentality, and it's even harder to have to think back and go, either I was wrong or times have changed.
Yep.
In a year, you're right. In a year, everything can change. I mean, look at the last 3 months.
Yeah,
that's very true. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I've even had to adjust things. I mean, I've done some presentations with CGC and some other places that have to adjust what I have always said as leading practices because of what we're dealing with, and there's circumstances with this, and sometimes we have to be good at communication with not just the IT team, but being proactive and communicating with management, and whether it be project management or just literal financial management and things like that, and finding out what their challenges are, and realizing that one of the first things that happened when people started working from home is a huge spike in the amount of people that were in end user computing environments anyway, having to use more server resources, especially, and this is, I know, going to get me in trouble in a religious kind of way, but especially those that were only VDI and didn't have any, server-based, apps and desktops kind of things going on. Those people had a really hard time scaling. All of a sudden, they needed, like, in some cases, double or triple the amount of server resources.
Yep.
Well, the problem is you don't have those server resources. So when it comes to leading practices and things like that, you kind of have to throw them out the window and say, sorry, folks, this is what we're dealing with right now. And we're all going to have to make some sacrifices here for the greater good.
Yep.
Well, and I think especially with what has happened this year alone, there probably is a company or two out there that for whatever reason was completely prepared, but who would have predicted we'd be sending home every person in an office to work from home? Who has that capacity just sitting there waiting to be used? I mean, that's the one thing, like DR.
Don't say the cloud, DJ.
Yeah, no, I know, but I mean, but even then, talking with like Sean Bass at VMware, or during the UserCon in Minneapolis, he was saying, I've got people calling me that had sworn they would never use the cloud, but now they are because they have to. But I guess to go back to the point that I was going to make is that a lot of companies talk DR and they go through the motions, but when it comes time to spend money on resources that are not going to be utilized on a consistent basis, that's hard to get them to invest in. I can't tell you how many times I've been down the DR route with a company, and in the end, they just don't want to spend the money on it, for a true proper DR solution.
Yep.
But yeah, so I mean, I can't, really, I don't think anybody was prepared for, what happened. I mean, just who thinks that the end of the world is coming? We're going to send people home and everyone still has to work.
I'm going to put on my tragic consultant hat and say, well, the people that listened to me early on in the process, they were ready.
With servers, resources, hardware sitting.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, honestly, there are quite a few that
I'm going to listen to you more often then.
Yeah, I got emails saying, you know what? Nice. Thanks to what you were saying, we're ready for all this. It's not been a challenge, and so that's the kind of thing you want to hear. And James says this is not a DR event; it was a business continuity event, and I positively agree with that. The disaster recovery is meant for something completely different.
I'm not comparing the two as if they're equal. I'm just saying the concept of spending money on resources.
Yes, yeah, that's the second part of his comment is management had a hard time understanding this, and I full-heartedly agree. In fact, so that was another. It's not necessarily a religious thing, but that's the whole final part of the Just Do This book is about concepts like that. I spend actually multiple chapters talking about that concept of like, we can't just approach this from a standpoint of, hey, look, just in case kind of things, or, and honestly, I will say about the cloud, it's the one thing that I'm like, cloud as a DR strategy is not horrible. But what we're seeing in this, I hate to say it, but cloud as a business continuity strategy really didn't work out like we thought it was going to. It just really didn't work that way.
I'll tell you from what I've seen, the companies that have been successful are the ones, maybe they didn't have the resources set aside, right? But they had the processes in place so that they could quickly get back up and running, whether it was in the cloud or on-prem or whatever. And a lot of times that's what's missing is documented processes, get from point A to point B, make it as cookie cutter as possible so that if you got to bring up a new hypervisor, new server, new VMs, it's just boom, you do this. And those are the companies that I've seen that have been very successful with this.
And Benjamin, you talked about documentation in that comment to me that, it was something that's, a lack that, you could have used even as a consultant as far as the documentation angle of things. What kind of things stand out to you right now that are gaps in what are kind of usual practices out there as far as documentation?
To me, and this is probably my biggest struggle with documentation is that when you have a lot of experience with something, when you're writing documentation, you assume way too much. And so, I'll write a document, I'll hand it off to somebody, and they're like, I lost you on point 3. Like, I don't even know how to get there. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, here you do this. So like the documentation of writing it for someone who has zero experience is you may have somebody whose job was literally just to physically rack a server, that they now need to physically rack a server, and they may start to load up and start to configure it because you're over here on a different part of the stack. but you need that person to do it. You can't do both jobs at once. So you need to lay it out in a way that's like, all right, I've never done this before. What are the exact steps that I need to do? And like I said, that's probably my biggest deficit, is that I assume so much. I'm so used to doing stuff that I'm just like, all right, here's the important point. Here's the important point. But there is a lot of, and I should say that's the important points for me when I'm writing the documentation, but not for the audience that is going to be utilizing the documentation.
Yeah, exactly. That's a lesson I learned pretty early on. Well, not early on, but like not within about last 5-6 years, actually. I would say I learned this lesson the hard way, is that what I assumed documentation was for was just kind of that CYA kind of thing. But here's the thing. When I would hand someone that kind of document that says, here's everything that's in your environment, they're like looking at me like, we know what's in our environment. We can see what's in our environment.
Yep.
You just built us a bunch of stuff. We've got that. We can see it. What did you do and why is the most important thing about that. And so that's the thing I'm trying to hammer home. And Jeff, you kind of talked about this at one point too, of like telling the story of this, here's us, and I think during what we're going through right now, if we're not writing this all down, when it comes down to months from now, we might be in a lot of trouble. So, I mean, how do you think people should be approaching that?
Well, I mean, I know from my experience, I've always been bad with documentation. Especially, and I think this goes for a lot of people. When you're under the gun, writing something down or typing it, whatever, writing a note to say why you did something or how this came about to be, it becomes difficult to do, or it's the last thing on your mind. And what I've learned through lots of error, is that when you go back, and I think you talk about this in your book, DJ, is when you go back, say, a few months from now, you go back to look, what did I do in April? And you don't have it documented, chances are you're not going to remember why you put in a certain setting or why you did something a certain way. And if you can't remember that, how do you know if you can even back that change out or anything? Maybe it's a critical piece and you've just forgotten what it does. And I will admit, I've been one of those people that said, well, if I don't remember, it can't be important. Made a change, and then all hell breaks loose. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's hard concept to learn, because we're always in a rush. We always feel as tech and, and especially working for companies is that you just don't have time, but you have to force yourself to make that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, Benjamin, what do you think is some good ways that people could actually do that, about making that time? What's some strategies that you found successful or that you think you want to implement in the near future?
Yeah. So one of the things that I started doing is, particularly like when I'm going through some sort of support documentation, is I try and get the person that is going to actually be supporting it to proofread it and be like, all right, tell me where I missed stuff. So, because, we talk about my position, there is certainly a support component to it, but it's not the main component of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So while I understand how to support it, I'm not the frontline guy. I'm not the one who, I don't know the typical questions and the trends that they get on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So hand the documentation over to somebody who is going to use it and have them proofread it before you finalize it, and have them give their perspective. And that doesn't mean that you did a bad job of documenting if they come back with a bunch of things. You documented probably the what it is and the why it is, but they're going to give you all right, this is how it operates. This is how we need to keep the thing running. So get the perspective of multiple people. Don't just assume that, you can, that you can see the whole picture. You may see a large portion of the picture, but to assume that you can see the whole picture of how it is going to integrate, how it's going to operate. It, I have seen very few people who have had that full picture. So get opinions, and getting feedback, even if it's negative feedback, isn't necessarily an indication that you didn't perform well. It is an indication that there is more to the story than what you're responsible for.
Yeah, and we're getting down into that detail, like support, or, it could be the data center guys keeping track of everything. They are the ones doing the work, and they know their ins and outs, and they're going to know the details. Like you said, that typically an architect doesn't know. And yeah, absolutely, getting them to proofread, go through the steps, all of that is critical for that feedback. And I think you made a very good point, Benjamin, is don't take offense when people send it back marked up for whatever reason. I mean, that's the whole idea of giving them the document so they can come back with feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get kind of brutal for a second here. I'm going to bring back a comment that James said earlier. This is something that I think is, I've said before, and I want to get kind of into the nitty gritty with this and make sure people hear this. And we tend to blame management for what they don't know. We tend to blame management for skill sets that they don't own. So sometimes when it comes down to, did management know about this? No, they didn't realize how important it was. Well, whose fault is that? We say management. I say it's us. I say it's our fault that they didn't know better. That's really something we have to start taking some responsibility here and saying, did we tell them the story? Did we lay everything out? Did we make it clear? And it kind of is an argument in a lot of ways. It's a if you're trying to sell somebody on a solution, you need to give them something to go off of. You can't just say, oh yeah, this is just my opinion, because your opinion doesn't matter. And honestly, this is the honest truth. I don't care who you are in the industry. You can be, I don't know who the titan of the industry we want to bring up. I don't care. Their opinion only counts for so much. But what really matters is, okay. And I kind of lay this out in the book. This is the what I call the magic paragraph. Something that got drilled into my head at Citrix Consulting. And I don't know who came up with it originally. I think it was one of those things that just kind of evolved. But it's okay. State what it is you're talking about. State the problem, why that's bad. Why they need to recognize that that's a problem, and what they should do about it, and support it with actual facts and research, that sort of thing. Just those 4 things. That's all you need to make a compelling argument to do that. So there's your free tip. It didn't cost you anything, but it could change your career if you just make your statements into those 4 different things in that order. It's very important to do it in that order as well. But if you can do that, that can actually make the compelling case. And honestly, I have seen the difference of when that's been used and not, and we're seeing the fruits of that today.
And I think when you get to the fact piece of it, don't go back to the reference architecture, kind of like we've talked about. I don't think that's a valid, this is why. Well, yeah, they recommended it, because then, well, why are they recommending it that way? I don't know. It's in the reference architecture. You haven't done anything. You haven't substantiated why a change needs to take place.
Yeah. That's true. James says, I'm seeing where managers are anti-remote work and they just want butts in the seats, and have been finding that their staff and team may have been more productive during the last 3 months or so. And that is something that is not new to me. That is something that I saw back in 2009. I think a lot of us did, where a lot of people were still working remote because of the fears over bird flu. And even though they were substantially less of fears, that was something that we discovered, like, oh wait, people can be more productive and things like that. And I think we talked about this in a previous episode, but the fact that sometimes we make our cases based on what we think is the right or wrong thing, and it actually ends up with different results. Back then with bird flu, it was really that initial focus on business continuity. It's like, okay, well, gosh, if something bad happens and we do end up all locked down, what are we going to do for our business? And that brought that awareness. Out of that awareness and some practice with that, what came is a better work-life balance, which kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, where this makes it so we actually do have more flexibility in that regards. And in fact, I think it was correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the conversation we were having with Melissa Case, right? That we were talking about that.
Yeah. Yep.
We'll link up here.
Yeah, but even saying that, I mean, a decade is a lifetime in technology, right? I mean, it's beyond a lifetime. It's I think sometimes it is hard for non-tech people to understand what the actual rate of change is for technology. I mean, you compare remote work 10 years ago to remote work today.
Yeah.
Completely and vastly different. But much, much, much improved. So, I think you get people that are stuck in that mentality. And, this all ties back to what, overall we talk about is, even if you're an administrator, just because you're not a sales engineer, just because you're not, constantly selling something, having those skills to be able to sell internally is absolutely critical for, just getting those projects moving forward, being able to explain, like we said, why something needs to happen or should happen, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times too, like, it comes back to selling a solution too. When it comes to making the time to document and things like that, is the other thing that comes to my mind. Is like, we need to sell our management sometimes on the reason why documentation is important just as much. It's very important that we take the time to do that. Well, sometimes management wants us to focus on other things. It's like this with training too. And I'm working through like the objections that people tend to have when it comes to getting training, right? Because we're working on a course right now, and it's a big undertaking, not just from the making the course, but selling people on it. It's actually harder than people might think. And a lot of times the objections I hear is like, well, we want you to take this training, we want you to learn this stuff, but we can't envision a world where you're not available for us for a week. And this is like, yeah, the problem is much bigger than me taking a freaking training course. It's like, it's a much bigger thing at this point. If that's what the big challenge is, I can't even be gone for a week taking this, boot camp training or whatever. We're working around that. We're making it so that it's just spread out over a 12-week period, which I think is going to work. I think. Never been tried before. We'll see if it works. But the thing is, it's one of those things where even things like that, whether it's training, whether it's professional development, even documentation, you still have to sell your management on taking the time to make that a reality. And so that's a really important thing. So,
and if a company can't give you a week to get trained, how are you going to get a week vacation?
Exactly. I was going to say the exact same thing.
At least training. Yeah, at least training you're semi-available if needed, like if it's critical. Vacation, you could be in the middle of the ocean. Well, I guess not right now on a cruise, but I mean, you could be hiking in the mountains with no cell service. So, I mean, if you can't, if they won't send you for training for a week because you're too critical, that's an organizational problem right there. But it is also, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to have any sort of work-life balance.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is where it's like, if you want to be that guy that everybody can depend on, but there comes a point where that dependence is unhealthy. And I mean, if they say they can't invest a week of training into you, then what's going to happen during your vacation? And then that also breeds into the guilt that we talk about too. Like, oh, I can't even go on vacation because I'm so critical to the business. Like, we got to break out of that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there's another book coming. I can feel it.
Let's push him over the edge, Benjamin. Let's do it.
So as we bring to a close here, Benjamin, any closing thoughts for us?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of good things as far as, career-wise and technology. Like I said, the big thing I've learned, throughout my career is find a good mentor and be a good mentor. Is that, you're not in this alone. And if you try and go that way, you're only going to get so far. You may have some really good initial success, but you will eventually hit a ceiling, because it impacts you in the way you operate in other ways that are not immediately apparent. But then also too is, I think one of the comments was like, train your replacement. Like, always be like, it helps to have a vision of what you want to be doing next. And part of helping that is train the person who's going to replace you. Like, because that also gives you the motivation to be like, all right, what can I be doing next? Because if I train the person that can replace me, they can replace you. So you need to be ready for that next thing. So, but that also too, it's an opportunity for you to grow, and take that as an opportunity. Not that I'm training the person that might be able to do it, more cost effective than I can, but this is the opportunity for me to grow, for me to do something bigger, to do something different. And as well as invest in somebody else. Cause everybody's had somebody that's invested in them in some way, shape or form. So take the time to invest in other folks as well.
Awesome. Benjamin, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Jeff, any final thoughts on your end?
No, I think Benjamin summed it up pretty darn well right there. Just want to say thank you to Benjamin once again. Great talk. And I hope everybody has a great week.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. And one more final note from me. We mentioned the book I wrote. It's actually available on Amazon Kindle at the moment as we're recording this. So you can go to it.justdothis.net/Kindle1 to get a shortcut to that, or just search Amazon for Just Do This, and that should come up hopefully for you. If not, the cover looks like this. So I encourage you to pick up one of those. That's a great way to learn kind of some of these soft skills we're talking about. Also, we have a survey out there. If you don't mind taking a little bit of a time to fill out a survey, if you haven't already, we're actually looking at a virtual event. We're behind the scenes. There's some things going on. I think this is going to be really great, but we definitely want your feedback. So right now, that's the survey we're featuring. So it's thrive-it.com/survey. And one final thing, I do want to acknowledge the affiliate that we have for this episode, and that is Krisp, Krisp. So it allows you to reduce background noise. It's something that I use on a daily basis, not only for things like this, but also for background or calls and things like that. So the background noise, that I normally filter out with like a noise gate, it just doesn't come across. It's using AI technology to see what is a voice and what's something else, and it filters out everything that's not a voice. It's fantastic. I highly recommend you give it a try. You can try it for free. https://thrive-it.com/KRISP. Greatly recommend that. Whenever you do, if you do sign up for the actual service itself, as long as it's within whatever time period that you try it out, they give us a kickback, which is always nice to support this channel too. So we greatly appreciate that. Till next time. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, we're here every week. You can get our calendar you can put it right into your calendar. Sorry, that's the wrong one. thrive-it.com/ICS. You can put that right into your calendar so you get reminders of when we're going to be live next. We're actually planning some additional things coming up here really soon, so look for those as well. Appreciate your time today, and we'll see you next time.